Today, I'm really pleased to welcome Andrew Barnes. Andrew Barnes, as many people will know, is the head of Perpetual Guardian, a pretty significant business that some people, I'm sure, do business with here. But his life story is a lot bigger than that one role. He has been for quite a while a sailor or has served in the British Navy. He's moved out here to New Zealand. He's been involved in a number of business interests. He has also been quite vocal about the problems with our COVID-19 response, being one of many New Zealanders who found themselves on the wrong side of the border and the wrong side of the bureaucracy and was seriously inconvenienced, while as a business person he watched a lot of policies that were making it harder for people to get by and make a buck, acknowledging the challenges of COVID, but just questioning with some of his Herald op-eds and other commentary whether things could be done a lot better. However, perhaps the thing that Andrew is best known for is his concepts of the 4-day work week. And it's the simple question of, well, where did this 5-day scenario come from? Prior to that, it was 6. At one point, people just worked all week. And then, of course, religion became one of the dominant forces in society. So you got a day off and then eventually 2 days off. The labour unions campaigned and eventually won a 5-day, 40-hour week. But all of these things are a matter of historical accident. Are they necessarily the best way for people to organise their work-life balance today? I think it's a question that Andrew has given a pretty compelling answer to in his book, in his advocacy, and perhaps most importantly, he's walked the talk and put the solution in place in his own business. So I can see there's going to be a lot of interest in this, and to lay out some more of the questions and give the answers to how we might all be more productive, happier, and have better work-life balance if most people worked a 4-day week. I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Andrew Barnes.
Good morning, everybody. I always feel a complete fraud when I do these things. And usually because I'm speaking to well-being conferences or HR professionals. And they've already been sold on the idea of work-life balance. The reason I'm a complete fraud is I didn't start on the journey to do that. My journey was quite simple. I used to binge read The Economist on flights back to the UK pre-COVID. And I read an article that said that people were only productive for 2.5 hours a day. In fact, if you were Canadian, you were only productive for 1.5 hours a day. And I wondered whether, in fact, that was happening in my business. And if you think about it, you know, it's not beyond belief, right? You come into the office or wherever you're going, you've had a terrible commute, you have a cup of coffee, you have a bit of a chat, you go on the internet, you sit down to start a bit of work, somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, can you help me with this? Or can you come into this meeting? And then if you do, you go into a meeting that probably hasn't got an agenda, it runs on for an hour and a bit, you then come out, you get back to do some work, somebody else taps you on the shoulder. Or the person sitting next to you in your office starts to come on the telephone with a really fabulously interesting phone call. And you're writing something really dull. So you're far more focused on what's going on over there. Then you get to lunchtime and you're on the second shift and the first person's eating a reheated curry. And it's wafting around you and you're getting hungry. Now, look, I mean, it's a little facetious, but actually there's a lot of truth in that. Because what we're talking about here is people being productive. Not busy, not the time they spend at work, productive. So my thesis was that what would happen if I said to my team, look, what are you going to do differently? If you come into work, what are you going to do differently? If I gave you a deal that said, I'll give you a day off a week, but you've got to deliver the same amount of output in 4 days rather than 5. And that is not 4 long days. That's 4 8-hour days. Now, if you go back to the starting point of only productive 2.5 to 3 hours a day, you need to get about 45 minutes of additional productivity in each of 4 days. If you're a Canadian, you need 18 minutes of additional productivity. And if you think about the working day, so 3 hours 45, still 4 hours to have those meetings, those water cooler chats, to go on the internet and see what the Kardashians doing, etc., etc., etc. So it's not actually that hard. Because what we do as business leaders is we confuse time spent in the office, time spent in a business, with productivity. So the number one question we get asked when we're talking about the 4-day week is a business leader, an individual will sit there and say, well, how do you measure productivity? Now, the answer to that, of course, is they're not measuring productivity, they're measuring time. So my thesis was that let's change that. So what I did is I went to my own team, gave them the challenge. Now, normally when you do process re-engineering in an organization, what people do is they hear one thing. In comes a consultant, they say, we're doing it wrong, we're going to do it this way, and your team hears one thing and one thing only. There's going to be job losses. You want me to do more with less, and I'm going to work even harder than we are. The way of the 4-day week, of course, is you go to people and you say, what are you going to do differently? And if you do it differently, I'm going to gift you a day off. So let's be clear. What the 4-day week is, it is not a free lunch. It's not about just reducing the amount of time that you work. We have this concept that we call the 100-80-100 rule. 100% of 5-day pay, 80% time, provided we get 100% productivity. And productivity is not just output, it's customer service. It's all the other deliverables that exist within an organization. Now, we've been doing it in Perpetual Guardian since 2018. When we did our trial, our productivity, overall productivity, went up 25%. It stayed up. So we're now twice as productive per capita as our nearest competitor. That's slightly helped by the fact that the government owns it. The other thing we found is that our engagement scores went up 40%. So that's empowerment, enrichment, engagement, enthusiasm, team cohesion, all of those things that are about the relationship that you as a business have with your employees went up 40% to the levels that the researchers here in New Zealand said were the highest they'd ever seen in New Zealand. Stress levels dropped 15%. More people said they were better able to do their job working 4 days rather than 5. Now, I expected when we announced this that this would be a very, a local news story. And I slightly dealt with the fact that my board didn't like it by announcing it on national television first. But what happened then was that we suddenly got hit with a wall of media inquiries from around the world. It happened when we announced it, it happened when we announced the results of the trial, and it happened when we announced that we were going to make the policy permanent. And we stopped counting at each occasion at about 14,000 articles. And we have been interviewed now by every single one of the major news outlets around the world multiple times, news outlets across about 110 countries, with a global audience now of about 5.5 billion people. And that news story hasn't stopped in the 5 years since we've been doing this. Because interestingly, when you ask people, wherever they are in the world, 80% of people say they would like more time. And that is regardless of culture, country, or race. We are faced with the same thing, that we have created an environment where often a lot of the solutions that we use are designed primarily to deal with the fact that we haven't got the time. Now, we started to get approaches from companies all over the world, and indeed countries all over the world, to say, how the heck did you do this? Now, I have to be honest, I had no idea how to do it. It wasn't actually that hard. One of the big lessons we say to businesses all over the world is, don't overthink this. Because what you're doing is you're asking your people what it is they would do differently. Now, some of that is process, but a lot of it is not. It's attitude. It can be organizational. The famous example of this is Microsoft in Japan. So Microsoft in Japan said, right, no more than 5 people in a meeting, no meeting longer than half an hour, please use Teams, and got a 39.9% improvement in productivity on that one thing alone. Now, with us, we do the restrictions on meetings. We also have the quiet hour. Now, some people may well have read about this concept of deep work. It's a bit of a buzzword, but what it basically means is you have a period of time in the day when you actually are able to focus without somebody interrupting you. Now, statistically, in any organization, especially in open plan offices, you will be interrupted once every 11 minutes, and it will take you 22 minutes to get back to full productivity. So if I give you a quiet hour where you can't be interrupted, that delivers me about 3 hours of normal productivity. Right there. So when we talk about the impact of a 4-day week, it's not just dropping the week, it's the processes and procedures that go on inside the organization so that you can enhance productivity. Now, why does it work? One of the best examples for me is I have a grandfather who is down in Dunedin. Now, what he does, he takes a couple of afternoons off a week, because in our model, it's 80% of time. You can take the time off in the form of a day off, or 2 half days, or critically for working parents, you can work 5 days a week, but you can come in late, go home early, which is much more helpful when it comes to childcare. So he takes his 2 afternoons off. And what he does is he walks home at lunchtime, and he then has his granddaughter come round to spend an afternoon with him. And they do grandfather, granddaughter stuff, they have some tea together, she goes home. When he tells the story, he cries. Because we've given him something that he never expected that he was going to be able to have. That's what makes this work. Because we're not gifting you something that you can put a price on. All too often with companies, we go, right, we'll give you a pay rise, or we'll give you some life insurance, or we'll give you a gym membership, or we'll give you a tangible benefit. But that is quantifiable. But the time that I gift you is priceless. Now, one of the things we do is around the world now, we run these pilot programs. So we created an organization, my partner Charlotte and I created an organization called 4-Day Week Global. That was a reaction to the fact that people kept approaching us and saying, actually, how did you do this? So we actually built a little program where we start a pilot program. We've done it now in the United States, Canada, Ireland, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. We've got upcoming pilots in Portugal, Israel. We're working with the Spanish. We've just been talking with the Argentinian government. These things just keep rolling around the world. Now, the latest research that we did was in the United Kingdom. This is the largest trial ever of 4-day week working anywhere in the world. We had 61 companies take part, over 3,500 employees. The data that we got out of that is consistent. 96% of employees, as you would expect, want a 4-day week to continue. Interestingly, 91% of companies said it worked. What we found was the same things that we've seen elsewhere: stress levels dropping, people having more sleep. There's a direct correlation, by the way, between the amount of sleep that you get and your life expectancy. What we also found is we asked this question at the end of the day. We said, look, if you had to go back to 5 days a week, how much more would you have to be paid? And 15% of people said, you can never, ever pay me enough money to go back to 5 days. 15% said it would have to be over 75%. The bulk of people said it's really 25 to 75% to go back to working that way. That's the value that people put on time. And they also saw productivity improve. So when you look at both the US trial and the UK trial, and you look at the prior period of 6 months versus the trial, or the comparable period the year before, revenue was 33 and 35% higher than the previous year. Now, a little bit of that's COVID. We did also see an improvement in productivity through the period of trial. But what it shows is this doesn't adversely impact on productivity. Engaging, I mean, we know this, healthier, happier, more engaged workers are more productive. In fact, there's been a recent study that looks at the performance of share prices of companies with happier employees, and they've tracked that against the S&P 500, and those companies consistently outperform. So this is a sensible, rational business strategy. It is not pie in the sky. Now, what you're seeing, of course, is things like sick days halve, in our case. In the case of the UK's research, it said sick days went down 67%. Now, let's put that in the context of a broader economy. In the UK, they lose 17.9 million worker days a year as a consequence of stress and workplace issues. So if that drops by 67%, that would be the equivalent of a £35 billion boost to the UK economy. Now, that's just the days that they don't have people off sick. But if you think about it, all too often before you go off sick, you got a day before that you're not feeling too good, and you're taking a bit of time when you come back. So this, again, from an economy point of view, is a very sensible, very rational strategy. 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 of your workforce at any point in time will have a stress or mental health issue. So A, they're not that productive, but B, they are the people who are then going into the health service. They're the people who are drawing on the resources of the doctors and nurses. And in fact, interestingly, when you look at the medical profession itself, the levels of stress amongst doctors and nurses are extremely high. So what would happen if you actually had a 4-day week in the health service? Would you be able to attract and retain more health professionals? The evidence would suggest yes. Now, there's a really interesting experiment on this. It was done in the United Kingdom about 2 months ago, where they got a team of surgeons to look at, it was prostate operations. And they rethought how they were going to do it. So they got 2 operating theatres adjacent, had 1 team, and they actually did a thing that they prepped 1 patient whilst they were operating on the other patient. It's not rocket science, really, is it? They managed to do a week's worth of operations in a day. Now, that is a really good example of what we're talking about here. It is about saying to your people, how would you do things differently? What is it that's stopping you being productive? And if we can find a solution to that, the benefit is given to you. It's not given in the form of bigger profits. It's given to you. And it's given to you in the form of something that you can't put a price on. Time with your family, an opportunity to do more caring, to do more volunteering, to retrain. You know, if 40% of our jobs are going to get eliminated by AI, when are we going to have the time to retrain our workforce? Well, actually, if we have a 4-day week, we have an opportunity to use that 5th day to upskill and retrain. This is a very sensible, rational strategy to deal with the challenges that we face. Now, it's not a silver bullet. I will be the first to admit. 4-day week is not a silver bullet, but it does deal with the stress and mental health issues that we have in society. It does deal with an ability to create a more caring society and a chance for people to do more with their families. The UK research, again from our trial, showed that the amount of time that men spent looking after their kids went up 22% as a consequence of the trial. For women, it went up 13%. It addresses issues like gender pay. How many of us have had women come back into the workforce after having a child who have negotiated an 80% contract to work 4 days a week and then deliver more or the same than their colleagues who are working 5 days a week? And we all know these people. So what we did, we instantaneously put our staffs, women who were working 4 days a week, we put their salaries up 20% to match everybody else in the organisation. Because it's about output, not time. And what that then means is taking time out ceases to be a barrier. We can bring our women up as much as we like, but if we're not also giving a chance for our male leaders and individuals to get out of the organisation, to feel that actually that is not going to prejudice their careers, we will never get the gender equality that we want. And actually, one of the great things about this is that whilst every single member of my leadership team hated the idea of a 4-day week when I introduced it, every single one of them likes it now because they've suddenly realized when they have time to think, they're better leaders. We also now have a cohort of people that have time to volunteer. Now, it's a source of great sorrow to me. My dad's a Rotarian in England. The average age of his Rotary Club is probably about 75. Because nobody has got time to join those sort of organisations anymore. Now, that's the organisation that cured polio. What are we losing if we don't give our people time, not just to be the best they can be at the office, but the best they can be in their communities and in society? So I believe that rethinking how we work is at the heart of this movement. It's not about a 4-day week, it's reduced hours working. Now that means that can apply to everybody, whether you're full-time or part-time. It can apply to all sorts of industries. So yes, it's done in manufacturing. Yes, it's done in agriculture, logistics, health, education, traditional office-based. It's done in trades. Somewhere in the world, there is an organisation that has rethought how it does work, re-engaged with its workforce, and is delivering a different solution. We always say to businesses, You know, the biggest risk is not whether you introduce a 4-day week or not. Your biggest risk is your biggest competitor does it first. And if they do it first, they will attract and retain the best staff. They will have a more engaged, more productive workforce, and they will therefore outperform you. Now, the next stage is politics. It's actually the changes we need to make in legislation to make this happen. I am precluded by New Zealand legislation from operating a 4-day week. I have to work round the rules. And all too often our legislation is highly prescriptive. But equally now, I think governments are starting to say, hang on, we have got all of these big issues, whether it be how we reduce carbon emissions. Well, taking 20% of cars off the road every single day. There's a piece of research, again from the UK, slightly suspect, but I'll go with it, that says that would be the equivalent of taking the entire UK private car fleet off the road as far as emissions is concerned. What does that do in terms of green goals without damaging the economy? What would happen if you've got a healthier workforce? What would that do as far as waiting times for operations, surgery, pressures on our hospitals? And equally, we talk about in Auckland the difficulties of getting into work. What would happen if we had those cars off the road and we got to free flow? If we did that, it's equivalent of adding 1.5% to Auckland's GDP. So if you came today thinking, you know, we're going to hear a lot of good things about, you know, work-life balance and all of that. Yes, it's there. But the real issue is this is the most sensible, rational business strategy I've ever adopted in my business. And I think increasingly that's what people are seeing all over the world. We didn't start out to do the 4-day week. We started out to improve productivity in our own business. But you know, you don't get many chances to change the world. This just happens to be mine. Thank you.